Welcome to In the Background of Life with Kelly Ramsey, the podcast that invites you to sit down in a cozy living space, sipping a cup of tea while we embark on a captivating journey about our intentional narratives in our lives. I'm Kelly Ramsey, and this podcast is your warm space to unravel the stories woven into everyday moments. It's a tapestry crafted with intention and purpose. So grab your favorite cup of tea, settle in, and let's explore the unnoticed details that contribute to the intentional design of the world around us. Together, we'll celebrate the beauty in the threads that make life extraordinary. All right. Well, welcome back to In the Background with Kelly Ramsey. We are excited to continue our discussion today about the work that we've talked about around reflections on motherhood. And today we're going to be talking about the impact of a father. So as I shared in our last episode, parenting for me is about both my husband's experience and my own as we began to journey through this parenthood experience. I will tell you that all of my learnings about fatherhood came from my dad, and I am always remorse in thinking about who he is and how he just influenced so many areas. So this is kind of a tribute to him as I think about him today. And he has gone on to heaven, but he is so alive in my memory and in my everyday life. And it doesn't hurt that my youngest looks just like his grandpa. And so I get this constant reminder of who he is and how he approaches life with my youngest one. And so as we start that process today, I want to give you just a reflection moment, a moment to pause and to think about the images that come to mind when you think about being fathered. What images come to mind when you think about being fathered? And I'll let you pause with that just for a moment. Image is everything. And so image is where we actually begin to create what we want to see come forth. And so when I think about the image of my father, I first think about my Heavenly Father. I think about the God that gave his only son for my benefit, that brought me into the family, adopted me into the family, and that nurtured me, nurtured my identity, my purpose, and the things that I needed to move forward. So that's my first image that always comes to mind. My second image is the image of my father, Albert Terrell Sanders. I think of his stature, I think of his smile, I think of his engagement and his thoughtfulness and how he would bring you into the room or space of wherever he was through a book, through a story. I always called him the griot, the storyteller. And so when I think about him, that's what I think about. I think about a man for all seasons, a man that could talk with the lowest of the low or the highest of the high, who could sit at tables that were kings and queens sat at, but he could also sit on the stoop and talk and just have conversation. I think about his experience at the barbershop. I've never been with him to the barbershop, but he would come home with these stories about the men who were in the barbershop, their stories, their lives, and how they would exchange all of this information in the moment in an hour or two visit. And then they would finish and get their haircut or shave or whatever it was. And then they would just linger and just hang out for half the day in the barbershop. That's the image that I think about. I think about in my life that because I was blessed to have my dad growing up in my life all throughout my life, that I don't have to have any father figures to know what that looks like to be a father, to what it looks like to be a man, to provide for your family, to give a space for people and grace for people to grow and to understand and to develop. And so I think about him as being that father figure for both us as his daughters. He had all girls, but for his nephews. And so I think about what images that they see in my dad. One of the most profound images that I have is a picture, and it's a picture of him tying the ties of my nephews, my two nephews, and they're getting ready for church, and he's tying their ties, and there's this big smile on his face as he's doing it. And I think about that image now has translated to fatherhood for one of my nephews. And as a father to a little girl, he's had this image of my dad being excited about his girls, right? And so those beginning images. The other image I think about is a picture of my son on my dad's lap wearing my dad's hat, which was a hat made in Cuba that was very dear to him. And he's jovial and laughing. And he coined his nickname, Jasonian, because he always would use that phrase when he would talk to them. And he was like a toddler sitting on my dad's lap. I think about when a man like my dad walked into the room, his stature alone, he was very tall, his stature alone brought attention to whatever he did. He was a man of class, so he liked classical suits and well-made, well-tailored suits and shirts and shoes, high-quality leather shoes. But he was more than what he wore. He was more than his shoes. He was more than just that impression that he made. He was a living example of what it looked like to dream, what it looked like to work hard, to take care of your family, and to really nurture who we are as young women. And one of the other stories I remember about my dad was that anytime we needed him, he was always available to talk, to chat. Now, he worked very hard. So he worked as a Teamster, and so he drove a truck. So his work was pretty hard. So when he would come home, we would always just be quiet and let's sit and just wait. But the moment that he gave us eye contact or ready for engagement, we were like, Daddy, da 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 da, Daddy, da da da. And so I just remember sitting, waiting for that moment, waiting for that engagement. But he also was a man of versatility. So he wasn't fake in any way or form, but he showed all of who he was. So all of his emotions. So he could get angry. We could see that part, but he could also be the most compassionate person as well. And you need to be able to see all facets of it. I often teach about how there's differences in women and men and how we parent and what we do, and both are needful. So there's both styles that are needful in that parenting. And there has to also be someone who takes authority, who says, no, we're not doing that. Or, yeah, we're going this way. And so there can be indecision. And so he was never a person that had indecision. So I invite you to really think about, who are your father figures in your life? If your dad was not present in your life and there's a void there and there's areas yet of healing, I would really, really recommend that you begin to dig deep in that. What does it represent? What does it look like? And if there hasn't been repair and your dad is still here, I would extend the hand to begin to have the conversations. I think one of my greatest hopes is for families to heal from the hurts and the traumas that they have experienced, because nobody is perfect. So we make mistakes. Sometimes we don't show up. Sometimes we disappoint, but we don't know the story behind what that looks like. Go find out the story. Go have the conversation. Don't sit in the trauma. Don't sit in the pain and not do something about it and address it. So there's availability of resources to begin to do that. But I also think about when I thought about that emotional availability of my dad, in the moments that we needed him to be emotionally available to us, he was available. But in the moments when he himself was not emotionally available, he shielded himself. But he shielded so that he probably wouldn't cause harm to us. But we don't know because we can't go back and ask that question. But we often demand of men to be completely perfect, transparent, emotionally available, and and we're not willing to understand that they're carrying a lot and that they also need their space and time. But there's a way to begin to break that down and to let them know that you're a safe place. I often think about the balance my husband and I bring to our home and how we can approach our conversations and parenting in very different ways. But at the end of the day, we're going to have a conversation and we're going to start to break down those barriers. So, one of the things that I've taught my sons is to have the conversation. So, I'm not the go between and the liaison. So, if you have a question, go ask your dad. He may say no. He may fuss and say, "Why did you do da da da?" But that's the reality of it. If you really want this, you need to go have the conversation. And that's true for adults too. Let's have the conversation and stop avoiding those things that we haven't talked about. So we want to be available. The other thing I think about is that, like in that image, there was a presence, right? There was a presence that he brought to every space in our home, first of all. And there were lessons to be learned, and there was legacy. So those lessons is where I think about the heart of the father for his children. I think about the protection that he wanted to make sure that we learn these lessons in order to protect us from harm and to not cause anything to happen to us. But he also wanted to affirm us, affirm who we were. When I think about affirmations, I think about going home as a married woman to visit the family and being in the guest room and looking on the nightstand and seeing a copy of Maya Angelou's Phenomenal Woman. No words, just a copy of the book on the nightstand, waiting for me to look and see it, to read it, to open it. That was my dad. That was my dad's touch. What he was saying to me is, this is how I see you. This is how I affirm the woman you have become. And one of the greatest gifts that I have when my dad passed is I collected notes, written writings that he did on the back of envelopes, on paper, all of these things I collected and I put it in an envelope. And my hope is to take those and to write them, journal them, and blog about who he was. So as I think about all of those handwritten notes, I'm reminded of one in particular. So it was a card that I bought him either for his birthday or for Father's Day. And he was a collector of things, just like me, his daughter. I inherited that. But in the card, he collected his birthday cards that we would always send him. But in the card, he wrote, "My legacy walking among me." And that was my sign to say he was proud of me and that I was walking out his dreams and the things that he hoped for and those things. He never said that to me, but he spoke it through his writings and through his card. And what was also very special to me, he was left-handed, but he had the most wonderful penmanship. My baby sister's left-handed too. And so his writing is just gorgeous. So I'll be taking those, capturing them, and finally writing my blog. So be looking forward to what that looks like. So that affirmation. And then we talked about that emotional availability. There's also emotional modeling. When you see a man who can be vulnerable enough to cry, to share his heart, those are special moments. And so that emotional modeling tells you the depth of who they are. And just recently, I was talking to my son and we were looking out the window. My husband was doing some work in the garden. He was tired. He had already did work in the garden. And my son was asking, why is he doing that? I was like, because he wants to get my flowers planted because he knows that's important to me. And I began to tell my son about what my husband was thinking. Like, he's like, how do you guys do that? How do you know, like, he's thinking all of that? I said, that's 26 years of being married, but it's also that emotional modeling, that emotional availability that I've witnessed in him, that I'm connected to be able to know what it means and what it looks like. It's not stoic. It's not a stoic, the typical dad sitting on the couch, bring me my plate, that kind of thing. But it's vulnerable. And when we're in relationship with one another, we can be vulnerable in those spaces. And that's when we really begin to heal. And so knowing what that heart of the Father looks like. The other thing is the invisible and the invisible work of fathering. I think about this when I think about how do you know you've been fathered, right? So you don't get fathered just because you had children. You learn it through that experience and as you're figuring those things out. But the wisdom of what a father carries is only received when we sit under the covering of that father, right? And so this recently we celebrated Father's Day and the boys and I got cards and gifts and whatnot. And to see the joy in my husband at receiving the cards we had written, it wasn't the gifts, it wasn't the dinner, but it was the handwritten notes that we wrote in the cards. And he laughed and joked. He's like, you guys are trying to make me cry. But what he was saying is, you captured the essence of who I want to be. And so we were showing him, this is the reflection of who you are on us, and we're mirroring that back on what it looks like. Those lessons are words until they're carried out. We can't do anything with those lessons, so they have to be carried out. But that invisible and visible work of fathering, we brought it to light by the words we shared. We wanted him to know, this is who you are to us. This is what you mean to us. You are more than the money that takes care of us, more than the house and those things. But you are an integral part of who we are. And because of you, we are. And so that was a message that my sons share with them. And then Father's Day was just a few days after, and they gave him another card. And they were like, more? He was like, more cards? Because they were really showing him, this is what it looks like. And this is how we appreciate you. And of course, it didn't hurt to do a few things around the house that have been lacking. And so they also showed their love in that way. So the lessons from a father teach us discipline, what it looks like to take care of our home, take care of our things and responsibilities, to discipline ourselves, and also to walk under authority. It also looks at faith, that belief. When I think about this, I think about my husband on the sideline as the boys play basketball and football, soccer, like through all the sports, baseball. And so he's the one cheering the loudest. He's the one saying, you can do this, you've got this. And this confidence and faith that he has in who they are and what they will do. It definitely shows the work ethic, that lesson of getting up early in the morning to take care of the house before he goes to work. Now he's retired. He still gets up early in the morning to take care of the yard, but it shows a work ethic. It doesn't say you need to do these things, but it says this is how it's done. Follow me as I give you an example of what that looks like. And it's about the presence. And so think about the presence of a father in a home, the difference it makes with the presence. Recently, when I think about my Father God, recently I attended a retreat, and that retreat just transformed my understanding of how the Father longs to be with us, about creating presence so that we can spend time. And it was a warrior cry retreat, and the theme was a table for two. And we were invited to sit at this table to partake of what the Father had prepared for us. And I'm still like just blown away at how many times and spaces we had to sit with the Father, and we used it. We sat there, we listened, we asked questions, we poured out, we got healed from hurt, all of these things because a space was created for us. Presence of a Father creates a space that he can nurture his seed, his generations, but it also creates a space that fills the voids in our life. And so we recently celebrated fathers as well at our church. And we called out those that were single moms raising their children along. And we also did a call to fathers to wrap around them in community and support their children, especially their male children, because that nurturing of a father looks very different than a mother, but it creates a presence in their life that can't be filled by anything else. And so the last thing that we want to share is the legacy and the impact of being fathered. If you remember my dad's writing in his card, he said his legacy walking among him. It's what we carry forward. What do we bring forward from being fathered, even from being mothered, being nurtured from those parenting years in our lives? And how do we heal those wounds to preserve that wisdom? So we cannot keep going being broken. And so we cannot carry forward the pain of it or the trauma of it, but we can carry forward the messages that we received, the things that transformed our lives, and we can carry forward a different story if none of your story is what you want to bring forward and transfer. So even from our mistakes, even from our traumas, we can heal and be better from it and then create a new story, right? But for some of us, we're carrying forward, as my dad said, the legacy, and we are walking it out. And I think about often, like, what is the legacy that my children will carry forward? And I could already see it forming. I can already see servanthood. I can already see dependability, integrity. I can see creativeness. I can see them thinking outside of the box and not being pigeonholed into one way. And all of that is my husband and I's legacy. Those are the values that we hold dear, and those are the things we want to see shine forth as they go through. But we can't do that if we don't heal from our wounds. And so we don't parent from the place of perfection. We parent from the place where we were parented and also where we were healed. And so being able to be healed in those areas will be critical for us moving forward. We want to preserve the wisdom. I often say, as I speak with congregations and large speaking arrangements, that I'm standing here because of all of those who came before me. And I'm representing every one of those people. I'm representing my dad, my mom, my grandmothers, my great grandmothers, all of the ancestors that went before me. As I stand up, I'm bringing them into the room because I'm bringing their lessons, their legacy, and I'm bringing forth their examples as I move forward. So honoring the complexity of fatherhood is something we want to consider. And I invite you to really think about fatherhood from the very beginning. So 0to3.org has information on father involvement in child well-being. And that information shares that when a father is in the life of a child from infant all the way through, the gains that that child make are greater. And so without that father present, yes, gains are made. But when you have someone in your corner cheering you on, guiding you, helping you learn, those outcomes are going to be even greater. And we also have the National Fatherhood Clearinghouse that we want to be able to offer. So that'll be in the show notes for you as well. So we want to honor that. And as we think about this, I want to give you this reflection prompt. to think about. And again, if you're journaling, take your journal out and write this out. What part of my father's voice still echoes in my decisions today? That's a good one. What part of my father's voice still echoes in my decisions today? And I think one of my parts of my father's voice was to always live life authentically. And in living life authentically, it meant choosing what I desired versus settling for anything. He was not a person who settled. And so I think about that often as I'm with my husband and our boys and how we're modeling that. And so for me, that's what I'm going to journal and write about a little bit. And so we've been on a journey and an evolution the last two episodes around the evolution of a mother and the legacy of a father. Those journeys include all those who have been there with us, our own parenting, our own motherhood journey, our own father journey, and how we were mothered, how we were fathered, how we were parented. Parenting is not just about the tasks that we do, but it's really about transformation of ourselves so that we can be a better self, true identity, being rooted in who we are. But it's also transformation of our homes, of our lives, and of our children's lives, because we chose the best part, to be authentically who we are and to parent with intention. So we'll give you one more challenge, our journaling prompt to think about as we say goodbye is just a question. What stage of parenting am I in? And how am I being shaped by it? It's not just about the children and all the tasks and doing the things, but it's about knowing what stage of parenting you're in and how you're being shaped by it. So it's an invitation for you to share your stories and your reflections. We would love to hear from you. We will be sharing this out on our YouTube channel. So we would love to continue to have a conversation as we do. So until next time, be sure to review this show notes for the references that we talked about, and we'll talk to you next time. Have a good one. This episode of In the Background of Life with Kelly Ramsey is brought to you by the Possibilities Podcast platform.